My daughter came home crying after school last Thursday. Her face was flushed, her eyes swollen, and her fists were tightly gripping her backpack straps. Before I could greet her, she dropped everything at the door and dashed to her room. I could hear her sobs from the hallway. I followed her in, sat beside her on the edge of the bed, and gently asked what had happened. She wouldn't meet my gaze, shaking her head and pulling her blanket over her face. I waited in silence. Eventually, she lowered the blanket and whispered, something I'll never forget. She said, "You're a nobody." I didn't understand at first. "Who said that?" I asked. "My teacher," she murmured, barely managing the words. "Miss Winsley," Lena said, "I'm just like you, a nobody." It felt like my chest collapsed. I blinked and tried to remain calm. What was happening when she said that? Lena looked at me, her eyes wide with hurt. I messed up my lines during the history project. I got nervous and forgot what to say. Everyone was looking at me, and she just shook her head and muttered it under her breath, loud enough for others to hear. I sat there in silence for a moment, letting my brain catch up to what she had just said. Lena is only 9. She still arranges her stuffed animals on her pillow every morning. She still calls me Mama when she's tired. And this teacher, someone I trusted to protect and uplift her, chose to hurt my daughter at her most vulnerable moment by attacking me. She said, "You're just like your mother, a nobody." My daughter had to stand there in front of her classmates, and I could see the shame wash over her, as if the insult held some truth, that being like me was something to be ashamed of. I held her tight. I told her what her teacher said was wrong and cruel, that being like me wasn't a flaw, but something to be proud of. But deep down, I could sense she had already started to believe the lie. I didn't cry or yell. I didn't even pick up the phone. I waited until she fell asleep in my arms. Then I got to work. I'm not one to make scenes or raise my voice, but I will not let people hurt my daughter. I won't allow anyone to define her worth or mine with a careless remark. The next morning, I walked into that school. I asked to speak with the principal, and Miss Winsley was there too. I didn't argue or plead. I remained silent as they provided their rehearsed explanations and polite smiles. Then, I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "This is from my lawyer. Page 3 is the recording. Page 5 is your termination." Their expressions changed instantly. In that moment, I realized something. I might be invisible to them. A mere name on a contact form, or the woman who appears at parent night without a husband by her side. But to my daughter, I am not a nobody. I'm the reason she sleeps soundly at night. I'm the one she seeks when she's scared. And I'm the woman who will dismantle the whole system if it ever makes her feel small again. You don't call me a nobody. Not in front of my daughter. Not ever. My name is Amamira Kalin. I'm 34 years old. And for the past 7 years, it's just been me and my daughter, Lena. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland. It's not luxurious, but it's full of love. There's a worn-out couch we refuse to replace, adorned with mismatched pillows Lena picked out herself. Our fridge is plastered with hand-drawn notes and spelling tests, along with the grocery list we always forget to update. Her room is a gallery of crayon art and construction paper stars. Mine is quiet, filled mostly with books and the scent of peppermint tea. I work from home as a legal researcher for a nonprofit. It doesn't pay much, but it grants me the one thing I've always fought hardest to have: time with my daughter. After my divorce, I vowed I wouldn't let her feel like an afterthought. Her dad, Jace, moved to Seattle a year after we separated. He calls on holidays and sometimes remembers her birthday. I've never spoken ill of him in front of her, but she's perceptive. She notices when someone disappears. Lena is the light of my life. She's 9 years old, funny, sharp, and endlessly curious. She can't stand injustice. She gets that from me. She loves reading, especially stories with brave girls who stand up for themselves. When she was 5, she told me she wanted to be both a veterinarian and a poet. I told her she could be both, and 100 other things, too. She attends Willard Elementary, a public school about 15 minutes from where we live. It's the kind of place where some teachers genuinely care, while others are just biding their time. I always hoped Lena would end up in the right hands. She was excited about this year's Living History event. Each student had to choose a historical figure and give a short presentation to the class. Lena chose Maya Angelou. We spent 2 weekends crafting her costume. She wore a simple black dress, glasses, and carried a notebook filled with memorized quotes. She practiced her lines every night before bed. I may be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. That was her favorite. She said it made her feel strong. On the morning of the event, she bounced around the kitchen, too nervous to eat her cereal. I helped her pin her hair up and reminded her to speak slowly, maintain eye contact, and breathe. Right before she left, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think Maya Angelou would have liked me?" I knelt down, adjusted the collar of her dress, and said, "She would have seen herself in you." Lena beamed, hugged me tightly, and then dashed down the stairs with her backpack swinging at her side. I watched from the window until she turned the corner. The house fell quiet afterward. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and attempted to focus on a contract analysis I was behind on, but I kept glancing at the clock. I envisioned her standing in front of the class, nervously gripping, her notes recalling every line she had rehearsed. Around 3 p.m., I was finishing up a call when I heard the front door slam open. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, eyes red and lips quivering. She didn't utter a word. She dropped her backpack, strode straight to her room, and slammed the door. I froze. That wasn't like her. She's emotional, sure, but she always talks to me. Always. I walked to her room, knocked gently, and opened the door. She was curled up on her bed, shoulders shaking, muffled sobs escaping from beneath her pillow. That's where the story truly begins. Not with what I did next, but with how I held her, how I listened, how I kept asking what had happened until she finally told me it was her teacher, Miss Winsley. She said those hurtful words to my daughter in front of her peers, words meant to cut, to humiliate, to silence. In that moment, something shifted within me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. I would not allow that moment to define Lena, nor would I let that woman walk away from it unchanged. This wasn't merely about a teacher's cruel remark. It was about what it means when adults forget the power they hold over a child's spirit. It was about what occurs when someone attempts to dictate your worth in someone else's voice. And I wasn't going to let that happen. After Lena recounted her experience, I sat beside her in stunned silence. I kept my arm around her as she spoke, gently encouraging her to share the story piece by piece. She described the classroom, her initial excitement, and the nerves she felt standing before everyone. She had rehearsed her lines so many times that she could recite them backward. But when it was finally her turn, something inside her froze. Her throat tightened and her mind blanked. She tried to push through it. She looked at her teacher for reassurance. Instead, she saw the expression that would haunt her later that night, disappointment laced with disgust. According to Lena, Miss Winsley sighed, shook her head, and said clearly enough for others to hear, "You're just like your mother, a nobody." The word nobody sank in my chest like a stone. It wasn't just the insult, it was who she directed it to and how. My daughter had been humiliated while standing alone in front of her classmates, not by another student, but by the adult. In the room, the one who was supposed to encourage, support, and protect her. I asked Lena what happened next. She said a few kids snickered. One girl tried to mouth, "Are you okay?" But Lena didn't respond. She finished her lines in a shaky voice, sat down, and remained quiet for the rest of the day. She didn't tell anyone. She felt embarrassed. That hurt the most, that a 9-year-old would carry that kind of shame, not knowing what to do with it, simply assuming the teacher might be right. Maybe she was like her mother. Maybe that was a bad thing. I tucked her into bed early that night and let her sleep in my room, something she hadn't done in over a year. She clutched her stuffed turtle and asked if she had messed everything up. I assured her she had done nothing wrong and that the only one who should feel ashamed was her teacher. After she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into the school and demand answers. But I knew that anger wouldn't fix this. Rage wouldn't protect her. I needed to approach this the right way, the lasting way. So I got up, grabbed my laptop, and began working. I accessed Willard Elementary's website, found their code of conduct, their staff directory, and their teacher evaluation forms. I took notes. I researched the Oregon State Education Board's policies on teacher misconduct and verbal abuse. I reviewed recent cases and complaints within public school systems. I knew how to do this. I'd worked in legal research for nearly a decade. If anyone could build a case, it was me. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. The more I read, the more disgusted I became. I discovered that Miss Winsley had been teaching for over 15 years, had glowing performance reviews, and was often praised for her discipline and structure, but none of those reviews came from parents. None were based on how she treated children who struggled or froze or didn't fit the mold. I decided to reach out to another parent, Rosa Marcato. Her son Julian was in Lena's class. I asked her if he had mentioned anything about the incident. She hesitated and then admitted Julian had said something odd about what the teacher told. Lena. Rosa allowed me to speak with Julian on speakerphone. He repeated it nearly word for word. "You're just like your mother, a nobody." My hands trembled by the time I hung up. This wasn't just my daughter's story anymore. There was a witness, an actual account. I asked Rosa for permission to document the conversation and explained my plan. She agreed and shared that her son had felt uncomfortable around that teacher for a while. I opened a folder on my desktop titled Lena School Matter. I saved everything: screenshots, statements, district policy documents. I contacted a friend, Tara, who works at a small legal firm downtown. She offered to help me draft a formal complaint and include a legal letter to the school. That night, I printed everything out and read each line twice. I kept thinking about how Lena's eyes looked when she spoke those words, how her voice cracked. I was determined that this would not be her first real memory of standing up in front of others. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I laid out my clothes, brushed Lena's hair, and kissed her forehead. I told her I loved her and that I believed in her more than anything in the world. Then, I packed my bag with a simple folder and walked out the door. The school building appeared ordinary that morning. Children filed in with oversized backpacks and sleepy faces. Parents chatted in clusters by the entrance, and staff members greeted one another as if it were just another Tuesday. But for me, that walk through the front doors felt deliberate. Every step I took was controlled. Every breath steady. I wasn't going to yell or break down. I had something more potent than outrage. I had evidence, truth, and my daughter's dignity to safeguard. When I walked Lena to her classroom, I knelt beside her and smoothed out the wrinkle in her sleeve. She didn't smile like she usually did. Her eyes still held the weight from the previous day. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Today's going to be a good day. I promise." She nodded slowly and entered the room without a word. I turned and headed straight to the office. The secretary, a woman named June, who had always been polite in a distant way, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Principal Edmonds. I have something that needs immediate attention." She blinked, nodded, and picked up the phone. Within minutes, I was seated in the small conference room just off the main hallway. The walls were adorned with student art projects and photos from past field days. It felt like any other schoolroom, but the folder in my hands gave the space a new gravity. Principal Edmonds walked in first. He was in his early 50s. A calm-faced man who always spoke as if he was trying not to frighten anyone. I stood and shook his hand. "Miss Kalin," he said. "What's this about?" Before I could respond, Miss Winsley entered the room, seemingly unbothered. She gave me a tight smile, as if we were about to discuss a minor scheduling issue. I sat down without acknowledging her. The principal cleared his throat. "You mentioned this was urgent. What's going on?" I took a breath, opened my bag, and pulled out the manila folder. I placed it on the table in front of them and slid it across the polished surface toward Principal Edmonds. "This is from my attorney," I said calmly. Page 3 is a transcript of a recording from a conversation between two students. One of them is my daughter. The other is a classmate who confirms that during yesterday's event, Miss Winsley made a personal insult about me to my child in front of her peers. Neither of them moved. Page 4 is a copy of your district's Code of Conduct. Section 2, Article 7 outlines professional behavior and emotional safety. The behavior in question violates 3 separate clauses. Still nothing. Page 5 is a formal draft of a termination request. It includes the evidence, a summary of witness statements, and the names of those willing to confirm what was said. We will be forwarding this to the district office if I don't receive an immediate and appropriate response. The silence was palpable. The principal finally reached for the folder, opened it, and began reading. Miss Winsley laughed once under her breath. Is this really necessary? It was a slip. I was trying to redirect her attention, and I looked at her directly. You humiliated my daughter in front of her classmates. You called her a nobody by calling me one. She didn't need redirecting. She needed support. I didn't raise my voice or lean forward. I just kept my gaze steady. You said it, and a child heard it clearly enough to repeat it word for word. You don't get to minimize it now. Principal Edmonds looked visibly shaken, his hands folded over the folder, his lips pressed together. He finally said, Thank you, Miss Kalin. We will review this immediately and contact the district's legal team. I want you to know we take these matters seriously. I nodded once and stood. As I gathered my things, I looked at Miss Winsley one last time. You told my daughter I was a nobody. You tried to use your authority to shame her. That may have worked on other kids, but not mine. You picked the wrong child. You picked the wrong mother. Then I left. As I walked through the halls, students laughed, lockers slammed shut, and teachers stood outside their doors chatting. It looked like any other school day. But for me, everything had changed because I had stopped waiting for the world to do the right thing. I had taken action myself. I didn't say a word when I left the conference room. I didn't need to. The truth was now laid out in black and white on the table before them. Let them read it. Let them sit with it. Let them realize what it meant when a mother stops asking for justice and starts demanding it. That evening, I received a call from the assistant superintendent's office. They had received my documentation and would be conducting an immediate internal review. I knew what that meant. It meant I had their attention. It meant they couldn't bury this. The following morning, Lena woke up cheerier than I expected. She asked if she could take her art supplies to school so she could work on a poster during recess. I said yes. I watched her pack her markers into her pencil pouch and adjust the straps on her backpack. There was a quiet strength returning to her. It wasn't fully restored, but it was coming back. Later that day, I received another call from Principal Edmonds. His voice was less polished than usual, with hesitation in every word. Miss Kalin, he said, I wanted to inform you that Miss Winsley has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. She will not return to the classroom during this process. I let the silence linger for a moment before I responded, Thank you for informing me. He began to offer an explanation, but I stopped him. Mr. Edmonds, I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in outcomes. If you want to rebuild trust with families, you can start by holding people accountable. He paused before simply saying, Understood. By the end of the week, a substitute teacher took over Lena's class, a kind man named Mr. Drew. He introduced himself to the students with a warm smile and promised everyone a fresh start. When Lena came home that Friday, she told me Mr. Drew had asked each student what they loved to do outside of school. Lena told him she liked to draw, and he asked if she would help decorate the classroom bulletin board. That night, she came home beaming, showing me the sketches she had made, stars, animals, and a quote from Maya Angelou written in big purple letters. Still I rise. My heart tightened as I read it. She hadn't given up on her project. She hadn't given up on herself. A week later, I received a final letter from the school district. They had completed their review. The audio and transcript, along with corroborating witness statements, were sufficient to support disciplinary action. Miss Winsley's contract would not be renewed. Her employment was officially terminated. The letter was filled with legal jargon, but I understood its significance. It meant they had no defense for her actions. It meant the truth held weight. I didn't celebrate or post about it online. I didn't share the news with other parents at pickup. This wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about demonstrating to my daughter what it meant to stand up without raising your voice, to fight without violence, and to maintain dignity even when others try to strip it away. Later that month, we sat at the kitchen table after dinner. Lena was coloring, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on staying within the lines. Suddenly she said, Mom, I think she was wrong. About what? I asked, curious. About you being a nobody. I think you're the biggest somebody I've ever known. I couldn't respond right away. I just reached across the table and took her hand. That moment didn't erase what had happened, but it gave it meaning. It reminded me why I did what I did. Not for the adults in that school, not for the administration or the policies. I did it for the little girl in the black dress, holding a Maya Angelou quote in her hands, standing nervously in front of a room full of people, hoping someone would see her. I did it because someone had tried to make her feel small. But she isn't small, and neither am I. Life settled back into its rhythms, but something inside me had changed. The school year continued, routines resumed, and the incident slowly faded from casual conversation. Yet, for me and Lena, things didn't revert to what they were. They became something better. Lena's confidence began to rebuild piece by piece. Her new teacher, Mr. Drew, was patient and thoughtful. He encouraged creativity, sought input from students, and ensured everyone in the room felt heard. It was a stark contrast to what she had previously experienced. He never once brought up the incident. He didn't need to. He simply showed her what safety felt like. One afternoon, Lena brought home a flyer for a storytelling night. Parents and students could take turns reading aloud, sharing something personal or meaningful. When she handed it to me, I anticipated her asking if I would go. Instead, she asked if we could read something together. I was taken aback. "You want us both to read?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Can we read Maya Angelou?" So, we did. The following Thursday evening, I stood beside my daughter in front of a small crowd of folding chairs and supportive parents. We took turns reading stanzas from Still I Rise. Her voice was steady. She looked up from the paper, often scanning. The room as if she wasn't afraid anymore. When we finished, the applause felt genuine. Not loud or forced, but meaningful. A few people even stood. Afterward, one of her classmates approached and said, "That was so cool." Lena smiled without hesitation. She didn't look for my approval. She already had it within herself. That moment felt like closure, not because it erased what had happened, but because it showcased how far she had come, how far we had come. I reflected a lot on what Miss Winsley had said, and the word she used so carelessly, nobody. A word intended to belittle, to diminish, to render invisible. I used to think that being quiet or modest made it easy for people to underestimate you, but now I understand the truth. Strength isn't about being loud. It's about being grounded. It's about knowing who you are, even when others try to redefine you. I also realized that Lena wasn't just learning how to be brave. She was learning to be observant. She had witnessed how I handled the situation and paid attention, not to the documents or the legal steps, but to the posture I maintained, to how I refused to meet cruelty with cruelty. I taught her that standing up for oneself doesn't require fury. It requires resolve. One night, as we prepared for bed, Lena asked, "Do you think she knew she was hurting me?" I paused. I don't know what she was thinking, but I know. "She didn't expect you to stand back up." She was quiet for a moment. "You helped me do that." I smiled. "That's my job." A few weeks later, the school invited me to speak at a parent roundtable about communication between teachers and parents. I almost declined. I wasn't interested in being a token example or a cautionary tale. But Lena encouraged me. "You're good at saying the truth without being mean," she said. "Maybe someone else needs to hear that." So I went. I shared our story. I spoke about the power teachers wield with their words. I reminded them that a child's self-worth can be shaken by a single sentence. I emphasized that protecting students means safeguarding their dignity. When I exited the room, a few parents stopped me to express their gratitude. One father, with 2 kids in the district, said, "I felt that helplessness before. You made me feel less alone." That resonated with me because, in the end, that's what this was truly about. Not just defending my daughter, but refusing to let any child feel unseen. Refusing to allow any parent to feel they don't matter. Refusing to let those in power speak without consequence. My daughter is not a nobody, and neither am I. We are people who rise, and we always will. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on the words we use and their lasting impact, please share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Share it with someone raising a child alone. Share it with a teacher, a parent, a friend, because standing up doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it resembles a folder on a table and a child reclaiming her voice. If you believe in stories that help people feel seen, please give this video a like and leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. This isn't just a channel, it's a space for real people, real voices, and the quiet strength we carry with us every day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.